Okay, first off I've got to apologise, it's taken me ages to get this video done. It's about the third time I've tried to do it. I wanted a nice vista, but as you can see, even today the weather's rubbish and it's foggy and you can't see bugger all. But the reason I wanted a vista was because today I wanted to talk to you about aspect ratio. What is it, what does it mean, and what different aspect ratios can you get? Aspect ratio can loosely be described as the relationship between an image's height and its width. So people might know of certain things like 4:3 or 16:9. The correct way to talk about aspect ratios is as a decimalised fraction, so like 1.33 to 1, for example. So I just wanted to run through some kind of typical aspect ratios that you find on films to basically explain why certain films are the shape they are. So the first ever standardised aspect ratio was 1.33 to 1, which you'll know as 4:3. And that was the dimensions, the aspect ratio of a standard piece of 35mm film. That's without a soundtrack. That even goes back to silent film days. So that's a 35mm frame that's 4 perfs tall. In the late 1920s, when sound came along, they then had to adapt that, and the next aspect ratio was born, 1.375 to 1, which kind of put a soundtrack down the side inside the line of perfs and still kept the picture at roughly the same shape. Now, because it became popular during the studio system in Hollywood, it became known as Academy. Most of the aspect ratios that I'm going to talk about today are to do with 35mm film, but the biggest format that you can shoot on these days is IMAX. It passes through the gate sideways, and it's measured in how many perforations wide the image is. It's 15 perforations wide. It's got 10 times the surface area of 35mm. It gives you an incredibly high resolution image, but its native aspect ratio isn't actually that wide. It's 1.44 to 1. But because it's so massive, it's really easy to crop it down. At the other end of the scale, you can get 1.66 to 1, which is the aspect ratio of a super 16mm film frame. So standard 16 had an aspect ratio that was pretty much the same as silent 35, so 1.33 to 1. Super 16 removes one of the lines of perforations from down one side of the film, so consequently you've got one perforation and then your film frame, and the extra space that you gain by not having that second row of perfs gives you a wider image. It's very rare to see a film finished and finalised in 1.66 to 1 because it's not very standard. You're more likely to see it cropped to the next aspect ratio I'm going to go on to, which is 1.78 to 1, aka 16:9. It's probably what your TV is, and possibly even your monitor. And you can shoot 1.78 to 1 on film as well. You can get special mechanisms called 3 perf mechanisms, which take a normal 35... Oh, for f***'s sake. So what that does is it takes a 35mm film frame, and instead of shooting an image that's 4 perfs high, it shoots one that's 3 perfs high. Consequently, you get a wider image, but it's not quite as tall, if you see what I mean. There's less resolution. Because you're only shooting images that are 3/4 the height of a 35mm frame normally, you're actually saving 25% of your film, which means you can shoot 25% more. It's also very close to the standard widescreen aspect ratio for cinema, which is 1.85 to 1. Now, the reason 1.85 to 1 isn't really very popular outside of the cinema is because that little 5 at the end is an odd number. Making digital displays with an odd number of pixels is extremely difficult because you need to have an even number, if you see what I mean. During the 1950s, cinema was trying to compete with television on quite a massive scale, and it was thought that a wider image was better, and also a higher resolution image. So consequently, when 65mm was developed, it was designed to have a wider aspect ratio natively, and that aspect ratio was 2.2 to 1. Todd AO, that's a company, pioneered a process whereby you could take that 65mm negative and then put it on a 70mm negative, with the extra 5mm being allotted for soundtrack, and then you could have multi-track audio and it all sounded really nice. And at 2.33 to 1, Techniscope is perhaps the narrowest aspect ratio using 35mm. It essentially shoots 2 perfs instead of 3. So again, you're losing the height, but you're getting a wider image. It's not as high resolution. 2.35 to 1 or 2.39 to 1, aka Anamorphic Widescreen. Now, both of these numbers were at one stage the standard for films that were shot, or at least made to look like they had been shot, using anamorphic lenses. So what are anamorphic lenses? Well, Essentially, they're a special type of lens with a curved element in the front that bends a much wider image into a standard aspect ratio. It would squeeze an extremely wide vista like this into a kind of a normal film frame, and then a matching lens on the projector would then blow that back out to widescreen in the cinema. That's quite an expensive process. The lenses are quite expensive, so quite often they would crop it to make it look like it was as wide as an anamorphic film, but it actually wasn't shot with anamorphic lenses, as we have done here, because I don't own any anamorphic lenses. So if I get rid of the letterbox, you'll see that actually, you know, and suddenly I've got far too much headroom. No guide to aspect ratios would be complete without a quick callback to some of the kind of extinct aspect ratios, starting with Vista Vision, 1.51 to 1. Now that was the precursor to technologies like IMAX. It took a normal 35mm film frame and then turned it horizontally and passed it through the gate sideways, so consequently you've got a much wider image. It's a high resolution format, and as I said, very popular in the kind of late 50s, early 60s, but it pretty much died out, being replaced by anamorphic. It has been resurrected though quite recently for visual effects work. Star Wars used it, but also more recent films like Inception and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Its high resolution is extremely useful. And lastly, one of the widest aspect ratios ever seen in the cinema was 2.76 to 1. Which you might know from things like Mutiny on the Bounty and Ben-Hur. This used a combination of 65mm, which remember has a native aspect ratio of 2.2 to 1, and an additional anamorphic squeeze of 1.25 to 1, which gives you an incredibly wide image, extremely expensive, but it's fantastic for vistas and epic battle scenes, which is why it was only used on a few films. But if you do manage to see a film in its correct aspect ratio, like, I don't know, the Blu-ray of one of these films, it's unlike anything you've ever seen before. Okay, well hopefully that didn't confuse you too much. It probably did, but go back and watch it again and I assure you it will probably make some sort of sense. The next time you watch a film and you wonder why it's got black bars or you wonder why it's a certain shape, then you will be able to have at least some inkling as to why that is. I'll be back shortly with some details on what happened to long delayed echo and hopefully some more interesting stuff. I'm going to put a coat on now because I'm freezing. Okay, well, once again, I never know how to sign off, so I'll see you next week. Bye.